got to keep the cover on today because Londo is lurking. And I don't. One day we're gonna figure out how to do these things.
Yeah,
and
we need to figure
make
out
sound effects and stuff, and then we'll just turn everything around and let you start whacking on it. Just like we've got a Bluetooth connection and a phone connection, so theoretically someone could call in and we could connect through that one and record them, but we've never messed with that, so to speak. Maybe one day we'll do that. We'll see.
We gotta mess with things a bit.
Yeah.
Definitely gotta mess with it a bit more.
That's the fun part of being a podcaster on Storytelling on the Plains. We have no idea what we're doing. We don't care. I got to hang out yesterday with a friend of mine that's from here who lives in Reno, Nevada now, and she was back visiting her mom. And she had yesterday to visit like 5 or 6 people, so she's like, be at my house at 11. And we went and we had lunch, and then she met with somebody else. So I got about 2.5 hours with her, which was great. It's always great to hang out with her, but I was talking to her about the podcast, and just that I don't know if we'll ever have sponsors or make any money on this, and I kind of don't care. I put out $20 a month, to have it put out there.
Right.
And for the storage.
I have a company now. I should.
Yeah,
start promoting it.
Yeah, see, you
Promote to the company.
You should be a sponsor here. Make Jason come and be a sponsor. And then the two of you can talk about your business, and we can just tack that on at the end. Go to our sponsor, because I'm sure people would. But the conversation we had, and she immediately got it. She goes, oh yeah, once you start looking at those metrics, and I go, yeah, same thing with my blog. The only thing I check on my blog is to make sure that all the email notifications went out, and other than that, I don't care, because I write my blog for me. I do the podcast for me, and and for you. And once you start being beholden to...
And my mom.
Yes, yeah.
she seems to be our one faithful audience member.
Yes.
She listened to the one on Ida, so...
she liked that part 2 should be this week, so, of Ida.
She liked that. She liked Ida McCumsey. That was a good story.
So... It happens, and it happens in every business. Once you start taking ads and getting sponsorships, they're beholden to them. And I don't ever want to be like that. And I know at the Star Herald, when I was a reporter there, it was always, you need to do this story because this is what gets the hits and the clicks. And I'm like, I argued all the time about that. I don't write things for the hits and the clicks. I write things because I'm like, that's a story people need to know. Mm-hmm. And whether it gets, 10 clicks or 10,000, I don't care. It's a story that needs to be told, and it's out there for posterity. And maybe it'll only get 100 clicks in 2025, but maybe in 2030, like 2 million people look. Who knows? Whatever.
Exactly.
So it was a fun day yesterday, and I was also thinking about the fact that Memorial Day has just passed, and I don't think of holidays often enough. That, we should do,
I don't either. Well, I said this will be past even Gay Pride, which is going on yesterday, but by the time it's out, it will be, a week?
Yeah, it'll be a week past it. Yeah.
We all got surprised by that one. I was just talking to Irene about that, it's like May 31st.
Yeah.
It's like, we're not even going to get a chance to get into June. It's Pride now.
Yeah. And I'm used to it being the second or third week in June, and it got pushed all the way back this year. Through me as well.
A lot of it has to do with those poor organizers that, they're here today and they're in like 30 other cities for the next week.
Yeah.
Or the next month. They're in a different town, a different city. These people are wonderful organizers, and I personally love them. I like to thank them for coming down. So, they're a good group of people. I
remember several years ago, the folks from Omaha came out and sang, and it was absolutely fantastic. I had a ball at the picnic. And if, if it was more than just Connor and I, we would probably have someone saying, hey, Memorial Day's coming up. We need to do an episode on some folks that, passed away.
It sneaks up on me. Memorial Day isn't like Veterans Day.
No.
Memorial Day always sneaks up on me, just like Labor Day. It's just that's today.
I think it's because, at least this was my experience at the Star-Herald, they would honor veterans on Memorial Day, and I'm like, Memorial Day is for the people who didn't come back.
Yeah.
Veterans Day is for the people that are still here. And I think people don't like to talk about the people that didn't come back.
No, well, and they've both been intertwined. Because I've seen on a Veterans Day, a Memorial Day-esque ceremony, and vice versa. I mean, I've seen that. I think it's just now, a support the troop day.
Yeah.
Which is great. It's fine.
Yeah. And I think Veterans Day has just been the thing that's been pushed more because it's been around longer. But
the reason I always forget Labor Day is because I'm laboring.
Yeah. I used to work retail. I had to work on Labor Day.
Yeah, it's like, what do you mean you're not supposed to work on this day?
I'm like, what job do you have?
It's called Labor Day.
But I wanted to, with Memorial Day just passing, and, I drive past the cemetery where Ronnie Bales is buried all the time, and I think about him a lot. And I wanted to tell the story of how I learned and intertwine how I learned about him, how no one knew anything about him. And I don't mean this to be a me tooting my horn kind of thing. I was just one of the cogs in the machine gathering more information about the man. And when I had first learned about him, I thought, this guy needs to have his story told. And I did get 2 out of 3 stories in the paper. I pushed for a third one, and my editor wouldn't go for a third one. He was okay doing a follow-up story, but then after the follow-up story ran, I got more information, and he wouldn't let me do more. But Ronnie Bales was also in Vietnam, so anybody who is an American that is probably older than 30 knows how contentious Vietnam was and how we didn't talk about it.
No.
And so I just wanted to intertwine his story with a little bit of mine. And it's actually kind of awkward for me because I don't mind telling someone else's story and saying, hey, this guy did some investigative work and found out this, which led to this, which led to this, because it's not me. But now it's me that is that person. So it was a little weird. I do not mean to toot my horn. This story is about Ronnie Bales. And today we're going to talk about him on Storytelling on the Plains. So about a decade ago, I was over at the Legacy of the Plains Museum speaking to the folks that were there. At the time, Olivia Garl was the curator, I believe her position was, curator/archivist, and Amanda Gibbs was the director. Amanda had been the archivist when documentary filmmaker Ken Burns had called and was looking to find information about Staff Sergeant Ronald Eugene Bales. And they were unable to find any kind of information about it. At the time, Ken Burns was working on his documentary about the Vietnam War.
Which is an excellent documentary.
It is.
I mean, well, all of Ken Burns stuff is remarkable. I personally love his Dust Bowl one when he talks about the
only
Bowl.
one I have issues with is the Civil War, but that's a whole other story for a whole other time.
Right. He did do the Civil War, didn't he?
It was very South-centric, and I
think it was,
and I'll just leave it at that. Anyway, at the end of October 2017, I'm there talking to Amanda Gibbs. She had called me and said they were doing a big display for Veterans Day, and it was going to be about all the veterans in the Panhandle. So normally Legacy of the Plains Museum just covers Scottsbluff County, but they wanted to do the entire Panhandle for all the wars, going all the way back to the Civil War. They knew they weren't going to find anything for the Revolutionary War, but they wanted to go back as far as they could, so they were scouring scrapbooks, books, journals, and other documents that they have in their archives, and they reached out to me and said, would you like to do a story on this, because we know there's other people out there in the Panhandle that we don't have a record of, and can you write that story? I'm like, heck yeah, and they did. They ended up getting some people sent photos in and stories and stuff, so, purpose served, and I was happy to do that story. So Veterans Day was only a few weeks away, and I just wanted to go over and see how they were progressing. I had gathered some notes together, kind of written a lot of the story, and then went over just to get some quotes and to see how far they had progressed, get a couple of pictures of how the wall was going, and that was when I first heard about Ronnie Bales. I had no idea who this gentleman was, and Amanda told me about the phone call she got from Ken Burns, and they couldn't find anything. So Amanda was really frustrated because,
finally a well-known documentarist comes and asks us podunk folk in Scotts Bluff a question, and we're like,
Yeah. So
it's like, crap, damn it, Scotts Bluff, damn it.
Yeah, the one time we could be famous.
Like, we had this.
And so if you do watch the documentary, I think it's in part 9. I'm not sure.
Until you mentioned it, I'll have to rewatch it.
Okay, so
it's a long documentary.
It is a very long series. There is a gentleman who is a journalist in Canada, and I forget the gentleman's name, and he actually has written a couple of books, and the books are in the Scottsbluff Public Library. And I feel really bad. I got really, really behind on this, and I didn't get a chance to go and check what his name was. Anyway, he went to high school with Ronnie Bales, and when the time came, he went to Canada. And yes, he could have come back after that blanket pardon years later, but by then I believe he's in Toronto or Montreal, one of the two.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's a journalist.
And it's beautiful in Montreal.
Yeah.
Why would you come back?
And he had the job, and he was happy doing what he was doing, so he did not come back. But he is in the documentary, and he mentions Ronnie in passing in that documentary. And so I think, I don't have the exact timeline because I don't know Ken Burns, and I didn't talk to him for this podcast.
Darn.
But it seems like he got interviewed, mentioned Ronnie. Ken Burns was like, oh, and tried to find out more and couldn't find out more. So it's
trying to get some sort of like history to the story, like some actual facts.
Yeah, because at the time he just had this story from this journalist, so he couldn't put it in without fact checking. And later on, I think it was at least 2 years later, but it might have been closer to 3 years later, I come onto the scene. So I totally get it. I get why Amanda Gibbs, who was the director at the time, wanted to know more about this dude because his story is pretty interesting. At the time, the only thing they could find was his picture, and I did a search online, and the only other bit of information right away that I could find was from the Vietnam Veterans Memorial's Wall of Faces, which listed his birth date as December 23rd, 1946, and that he died April 15th, 1971. It's not a lot to go on, but I got to work. You got a picture, so you know what he looks like, and now you got a birth and death date, and you know he was in the military. Mm-hmm. So I went back to the newspaper and wrote my story about what the museum was planning. I wanted to wait to see if I could find more information on Ronnie, and I wrote in my story about how others could submit their loved ones' photos for this wall they were doing to honor them for Veterans Day, and I made sure Ronnie was in my story in the hopes that somebody who knew him might know more and might be able to point me somewhere else. And I put him as far up to the top of the story as I could because my story was about, hey, send your photos in of your loved ones, but I was trying to boost him up a little bit so that folks might see it and say, hey, I knew him, and give me some more information. And I was thinking at the time, I don't care that he died 9 months after I was born. His information is out there, and someone knew this guy. Someone has more information. I didn't even know who his family was. And so with that, I did what I'm not supposed to do as a journalist, and I made a personal connection with Ronnie Bales. I was like, this guy needs to be recognized for what he did and who he was. And we're going to get to that in a minute, but I already had this information in the back of my head, and I was trying to verify some stuff. And like I just said before, Vietnam was a huge hot topic. Nobody talked about it in New York when I was a kid. You just learned the couple of questions that was going to be on the state exam, and no one wanted to talk about it.
Would that be a hot topic or a cold topic?
Yeah. I mean, it was hot while it was happening, and people were protesting the war, and, go look up the Kent State Massacre, or Kent State shooting, whatever you want to call it. That was a nightmare. That's in Ohio. That's not here in Nebraska, so we're not going to cover that. But by the time I got to high school in 1984, nobody wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
I have 2 uncles that were in Vietnam. One I didn't even know till I was an adult that he was in Vietnam. The other one just never, ever talked about it. And now my mom had a friend from Vietnam, and she went there for 6 weeks for her friend's wedding, and lived as the Vietnamese do. She did hit a couple of tourist spots because you're in Vietnam, but she basically lived as the Vietnamese people did. When my uncle, her brother, because my other uncle is my uncle by marriage, but when her brother found out that she was going to Vietnam, he very rarely cussed, and he cussed at her and didn't speak to her for more than a month.
Interesting. Well, I can see why.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of salt in the wound if you know the history of
yes.
Vietnam.
And my mom did tell him, I'm going there as a tourist. You went there with a gun. It's not the same thing.
Yeah, no.
But this was 1995, and I don't know the dates of my uncle's service, but it was, I think, 73, 74 when he came back. So I don't know what he did. I don't know what he saw. He didn't really talk about it, which is very typical of Korean and Vietnam vets.
And it's the same way. I also had an uncle who was a Vietnam vet who sadly passed away, but he, we never, ever talked about it.
Yeah.
I only knew because I was told.
Yeah.
Because, we respect our military and our family, so it wasn't that we weren't going to say he was a soldier or what he did, but that was where it ended.
Yeah.
That's just where it ended.
Yeah. And for a lot of Vietnam vets, they still don't talk about it.
Yeah.
So there are groups that do, but a lot of them don't.
I was going to say, I was very, very fortunate to have a boss when I became a security guard. And I was a security guard for almost 2 years, just securing some data hub. Nothing like special. I don't even think I had a gun. I didn't have a gun. I don't even think I had pepper spray. But anyway, you went around and you patrolled. But my boss, who was a Vietnam vet as well, and was one of those that got sent there by the judge because he wasn't the best kid kind of situation. And that happened a lot, just so you guys know. Way past Vietnam, up into the 90s, military was as much of a punishment as jail for certain male youths.
Yeah, it was go to jail or join the military.
Yep. And workforce came around, and they kind of were the branch that got kids away from that. They were a military of themselves. If you guys know what workforce? Or
Job Corps.
Job Corps, sorry, not workforce. Job Corps.
As we're recording today, I don't know if you read the news, but they're all being closed.
Oh, are they?
Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah.
Well, then, no, I did not know that.
Funding's been pulled.
And but because they were the gap to keep kids from going into services by the judges.
Yes. Yeah. And the last few days, I don't want to get too political on this, but you and I both worked at the youth shelter, and we sent many kids
to
Job Corps.
And that's very very unfortunate.
Yeah,
very
and it turned their lives around, and I had to stop reading the thread on Reddit about it, of all the people saying, this is who I was. Yeah. I got sent to Job Corps, and it completely changed my life. And it's heartwarming to read those stories, but it's also sad because you and I worked with those kids, and now they don't have that opportunity. Yeah. So what's going to happen?
But going back to my boss, he told me whether I wanted to or not, because we did the overnight shifts, and you did 12-hour shifts. So if you started at 4 p.m, which I did, you didn't end until 4 a.m. And he seemed to have really liked to do this Vietnam ghost storytelling right at midnight, and he'll just start talking about it, and he talked about anything I wanted to know. I could ask any question, which was such an amazing opportunity, how honest he was about his own life, about his own experience in the war, about the politics and the people that he got to admire and not despise. He talked pretty highly of Nixon, for instance, because Nixon, despite everything he was, actually did support Vietnam vet troops. So there was that. But yeah, no, it was, you talk about, snakes that can kill you, one-step snakes. If the snake bites you, you can only take one step and you're dead. They call them one-step snakes and stuff like that. Yeah. And not to mention the pits with the spikes and the tunnels and everything, and the people that he's had to kill and the people he's had to leave behind. They're just horrible, horrible stories. But I'm very, very thankful that he got to tell them to me, because my uncle couldn't. So I kind of felt that was a bit of closure for me to find out what I needed to.
Yeah. So I did some research, and I was hitting dead ends. And sometimes I just wonder if my search skills fail me, or if info's just not out there. But my deadline had arrived, and I couldn't get any more of Ronnie Bales in the story than what I had. I did have a little bit of more information, which we're going to get into, but because I couldn't verify it, I couldn't go in the story. It was just, this dude told me this. Well, I can't verify it other than this dude told me. So the story ran on November 1st, 2017. That's the date on the online edition of the Star Herald. I think it ran on the 1st. It might have been the 2nd, because the Star Herald doesn't have time stamps, just date stamps. So gotcha. if it had been, let's say it went up at 2 p.m. on November 1st, then I could confidently say, yes, it was in the November 2nd newspaper. It just, I can't be for sure. It was either in the November 1st or 2nd newspaper. So if you go look in the archives, it's one of those 2 days. There you go. And I thought, surely Ronnie Bales had family. Somebody remembered him. Somebody would read my story and help me figure this out. And then in the meantime, I spoke with another contact that I did stories with, who worked for the Nebraska State Historical Society, known as History Nebraska now, whatever, it's the Historical Society. She had some information on this journalist, and she had been in contact with him via email, but the info that he gave didn't really expand on the info I already had, because the info I already had was someone had talked to him, or he had talked to Ken Burns had talked to the museum talked to me. So all it did was confirm that when I went through that little phone chain of communication, that it didn't get changed. It was what he had said. So I didn't really learn anything new. The response to my article, though, was pretty heartwarming and touching. A family member had read the article and contacted the museum and said that he was surprised to see Ronnie's photo in the paper. As far as the family member could remember, Ronnie had never been honored before in the newspaper. And I'm like, okay, so the pieces of his life are starting to appear. We got a family member that's like, yeah, I remember Ronnie. Bales had died in combat and was listed as KIA, so he was killed in action. He died trying to save the life of one of his fellow soldiers, who had suffered an injury on the battlefield. The director of the museum relayed to me what she had learned. And so I know the rest of this podcast is going to skip a little bit around in the timeline, but I'm going through the timeline in the order that I had learned the information. So from the sounds of it, Bales tried to save him and died from a mortar to the chest. He died a hero, but was never acknowledged locally for his actions, which was actually kind of common in this time. So before heading off to Vietnam, Ronnie had served in Germany. He re-enlisted in Germany and was then sent to Vietnam. So he had done his time and could have gone home, and he decided to re-enlist. And we'll get to it later, but the family has a history of service, so I'm sure that's what...
So he was a volunteer. He wasn't a draftee.
No, at least not the second time. I don't know if he volunteered the first time when he got sent to Germany or if he was drafted, but when he did his time, he decided to re-enlist. Yeah. So he went voluntarily the second time. His family member said he was the last, so the family member was the last person in Ronnie's family to see him alive in January 1971, just 3 months before he died. I don't know who the family member is. I have suspicions, which I'll get to later, but I can't confirm it. This was relayed to me from Amanda Gibbs, the director at the time, because the family member called her. So I wasn't able to even figure out, did he see Ronnie in Germany or did Ronnie come home before he went to Vietnam? I'm not sure. I just know that he re-enlisted while he was in Germany. His family member doesn't know who he, Bales, tried to save or if he lived, but now we know, the director said. I want to thank the Star-Herald for helping us on this. We appreciate it. And we'll get to who it was here in a little bit. But another piece of the story is coming into play, so I was able to have enough information that I could run a follow-up story. So the follow-up story runs, and I get a call from Burley Toomey, who's a relative of Ronnie's. And if I got the correction, if I have the connection correct, she was his niece.
Okay.
And she just called to talk, but being a reporter, I instinctively started typing as I was talking to her. And I don't ever remember my editor letting me run the story. I don't have it. I can't find any copies of a third story. I remember fighting to get this third story with all the information she had given me, and it just never happened. So I still have those notes, and I used them for this podcast, even though she told me this in November of 2017. I believe it was November 2nd, she and I had the phone conversation, and she just called. It was at the beginning was just, thank you for running this story about Ronnie. The family appreciates it. And then we just kind of started chit-chatting. And she starts telling me more and more and more. So I automatically start typing because I'm like, this is still a story. So that's where some of my notes for this podcast coming up come from. And I'm going to relay it as best as I can, because even though I take notes in almost complete sentences when I do an interview, typing on the computer, sometimes I don't. And so there's a few things I didn't include in this because it's been 8 years. And I haven't looked at those notes in 8 years. And some of it, if I had written it even in 8 days after the story ran, I would have remembered why I wrote a certain thing the way that I wrote it. And now 8 years later, I've written probably 700-800 more stories at least, and I don't remember why I did that. So anything I wasn't sure about are in my notes, but they're not going to be in this podcast. And I guess they're 7.5 years old, not 8, but still close enough. So I'm just going to do my best to relay that. Ronnie was the youngest of 3 boys. He had a brother Bill and a brother Carl, who they called Buzz because his dad had the same name. I'm not sure if he was originally in the Air Force or not. My notes are confusing on that. I know his brother Carl was in the Air Force. And sometimes when you interview people, we'll use this as an example. They're talking about Ronnie. They switch to Carl. They switch back to Ronnie. They switch to Bill. And at the time, I followed that and took the notes. But again, it's been almost 8 years since I looked at it, so I'm not totally sure. I think he was only maybe in the Army. But that's something you can look up, and if his family ever listens to the podcast, they would know as well. But he did re-enlist, and Verley's dad was the one that was in the Air Force. Ronnie was also divorced at this point in time in his life. And so back in 1988, Verley was writing an essay in college, and the Vietnam Veterans Memorial was celebrating about it being finished and opened. And I meant to look up the date that it opened, but I remember going there in the spring of 85 on a school trip, and it was open then. So she said it was either in a Time or Newsweek magazine, and so it was just basically a big old spread about, it opened, it's successful, because even the memorial was controversial when it opened. They held a contest for it. And then there were people that didn't like that a white guy didn't get picked. If I remember correctly, it was a lady who designed it.
I think you're right.
Yeah. And then, because we're still in that time period of not talking about it, no one knew if it was going to be successful, or did the government just waste all this money. So from what I understand, the article, and I probably read it because back then Newsweek was not the shell of itself that it is now. Time and Newsweek had fairly decent articles every week in their magazine, and I used to read both of them regularly. So I probably actually read this story. So
I guess I never minded the memorial. Of course, I was born in 1988, so I guess I wouldn't, would I?
Yeah.
I think to this day, growing up with it all my life, is actually pretty proper. It's just, it's nothing fabulous or nothing special. It's just a straight up black marble wall with the names on them. And that's what it is.
Yeah, and today it's not controversial, but back then it was. So I don't remember why she was writing this essay or what the topic was, but she got emotional when she read that story, and she knew Ronnie's name was on the memorial. So she sat down and wrote a paper for her college class about what it would be like if she were able to visit the wall, because she's here in Nebraska and the wall's in Washington, D.C. She sent it to her dad, and he said it was the best ever. And she cried when her dad said that. And she told me that meant more to me than the grade that I got on the paper. Because, all her dad and her 2 uncles served, and she wanted to know what he thought of her paper about how she thought she might react when she went to the wall. She didn't tell me, what specifically in the paper, what she wrote and stuff, just that general stuff. But it probably hit a nerve with her dad, and it probably was really good. I mean, back then you got to do good jobs on your essays, not like today.
You actually have to write them.
Yeah. When I went to college in 88, by 90, so halfway through my college career, they started requiring papers being typed up. My freshman,
that's just the most failure that we've ever done.
Yeah.
I only say this now because I recently had an incident where I had to call the police. It was nothing serious. It was just an incident that happened, and the cops came and we settled the incident and whatever. And he didn't have a card a business card, which a lot of them don't. You know, they give them out like chocolates, you know, so they're out before they know it. So he wrote it down, all his information. I have never saw such atrocious handwriting in my entire life. It looked like a 2-year-old, officer 2-year-old were trying to give me this information about him. I couldn't read the number. I couldn't read his name.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure I thought it said Lickin' Ball. And I had to really look at it 3 times before I'm like,
"You're Luckin' Bill."
Yeah, it was Luckin' Bill. I was trying not to name drop, but
sorry.
I was trying to be polite to the officer, but I had to look at it 5 times. I'm like, "There's no way your name's Officer Lickin' Balls." Like, there's just no freaking way.
Yeah,
life is that cruel to you. But that's he is a product. He was much younger than me. He's a product of the generation. No one writes anymore, and because of that, I'm dyslexic and I have horrible grammar and I can't spell worth shit. But you can read what I can't spell.
Yeah, and at least I can read it and I know what you were trying to say.
Yeah, you can read. I have pretty good penmanship, not to pat myself too hard on the back, but I have pretty good penmanship. My husband, not so much.
Yeah. When I worked at the shelter, I loved when you worked before I came on to shift because I knew I was going to be able to read what was written. It might have some crappy grammar in it, and I tried not to judge anybody because that was one thing they brought up a lot, was like, "Oh, God, the reporter's reading the reports again." And I'm like, I'm trying not to nail anybody on poor grammar.
I can't put a comment or period or explanation anywhere where it's supposed
I could read your logs, and I knew what had happened that day before I came to work. And I didn't have any issue with that. And there were other people.
A couple of other coworkers, I just gave up. I'm just like, this isn't English. I'm pretty sure she just took her pen and went and just scribbled. Scratch. And it's like, well, no one can read this. I guess I did a good job.
Yeah, there were definitely coworkers that when I came in, okay, tell me what happened today, and then with that knowledge, I could sometimes read what they had written.
I see what you're trying to say.
Yeah, and again, they were all younger than you.
They were all younger than me, and I came from a rural school. Because I don't know how much penmanship was focused on here in the town, but out in Lake Alice, you were still doing cursives on chalkboards, with lines. You were still given the old lines on paper to learn how to do proper cursive. Yep. I mean, you had to do all of that.
Yeah.
I was still learning beginning typewriting to learn how to spell. It was past typewriters, so we weren't like that old. We were still using typewriters, but there was the next step that was in the 80s. What's it called? It was like an electric typewriter.
Yeah, you had electric typewriters then. Yeah, I learned on not the old-fashioned ones from the 1920s where you had to be like, bam, bam, and you're like, yes, I did learn on the ones where you typed and I had to hit the carriage and hit the carriage return. But those old-timey ones where you really had to jam your fingers in.
Clack, clack,
yes,
clack,
I didn't learn on those ones. But there's studies out, and they've replicated them, that the writing to your brain causes you to remember things better. I'm not a scientist. That's my stupid layman's interpretation.
I thought you were about to say they reintroduced the clacking noises. In some places, which they did. I think like Google or in some places,
my husband,
the clack noises.
My husband has a mechanical keyboard and he loves it, and I just want to smack him every time he uses it. Mine are super silent, but I also have PTSD and I have issues with noise, and that bothers me. Yep. So my keyboards are silent because of that. But he loves the little clicking noises when he types. And
Hunter S. Thompson used an old-fashioned keyboard his entire life. He hated the new technology, so he had this old school rickety freaking typewriter his entire career. I thought that was pretty amazing.
And if anybody remembers Andy Rooney from 60 Minutes, he typed up his column every week that he did at the end of the show, and he gave it to someone who put it into the computer, but he typed it up on paper.
I can believe it.
Every week. And people gave him crap because old man, you got to come into the future. But It's what he learned. And I understand that because I use my phone for a phone and texting. Very rarely will I open up a web browser and do anything on it. Someone texted me a link to a story yesterday, and I was like, "Oh, why didn't you email me?" That's okay. That's fine. That's okay. I emailed myself, and then I read it on my desktop because that's how I learned, and that's how my brain functions. And it's really hard for me to use a phone to get information. I really struggle with that. And I'm not old. It's just that's the technology that I learned. It's the same thing with Paul is now doing the Control-C, Control-V thing because I'm a few years, even though we are exactly the same, well, not exactly the same age. I'm 25 days older than him, but we're the same age. He grew up in Britain. I grew up in the U.S. I learned how to do that on DOS. I know all those Control-C, Control-V, Control-P. I know all the key controls because I was using computers before the mouse came along. He didn't start using computers till the mouse was already there. So he always did highlight and then right-click, copy, right-click, paste. So for me, right-clicking, copy, paste is slower than Control-C, Control-V because of the way we learned. So if you took that away, yes, I can still do it with just the mouse. It just takes me longer because of that. And he's trying to learn the Control-C, Control-V because he thinks it's neat and it's a better way to do it. But he's working with 35 years of knowledge of doing it the other way, and now he's trying to retrain his brain. Yep. So I totally get that. So anyway, back to Ronnie Bales. We got way off topic there. I was like, I don't even have a good transition here.
I don't know where it began.
I don't know either. There's no good transition to it, so we're just going to hop back in. And I hope that this next bit from my conversation with his niece isn't too confusing for folks because I pulled out all the obvious stuff and then some of the stuff I had to think about. I'm like, I think I have this right. And I'll let you know where I get a little sidetracked. So that was a tip. And I have this tip for everyone who ever has to write anything, especially reporters. My first editor, Steve Frederick, taught me to write the story as close to the interview as you can because you will remember things. And you remember little things like, Connor had a yellow shirt on or, he's I don't want to give too much revealing information about you, but I would remember things.
You make it sound like I'm not wearing anything. I am wearing clothes.
I just meant the tattoo, and I don't want to describe it. But I would describe those things and how he was sitting and those kind of things. As time goes by, you forget those little details, and those little details are what makes a story better. And I'm looking at this 8 years after I freaking wrote it. So I'm just going to hop in here. So my dad told me Ronnie re-enlisted in Germany and volunteered to go to Vietnam because my dad and Bill had kids. Because my dad and Bill were married, and I'm sorry, that's a direct quote. Y'all know what I mean. Her dad did not marry her brother. Or his brother, but that's how it sounds. And Ronnie was divorced. Only one brother could serve at a time in a war zone.
So basically, the dad and Bill were both married.
Yes, two ladies.
Two ladies, individual ladies.
Yes, not the same lady.
Not the same lady. That would have been interesting.
Oh, yeah. Dad already did duty in Thailand, and Bill had served, and Ronnie said they weren't going over there again. So basically, both of them had already served. They had both already been in war zones. Ronnie had not yet because he was in Germany, and he basically said, my brothers aren't going back to a war zone. So that he did. We didn't know the full story until Uncle Bill and Grandma went to reunions. That's how they found out the whole story. So we'll get to it in a little bit, but Ronnie was part of the 101st Airborne Delta Raiders, and I guess the Delta Raiders hold reunions every couple of years. Okay. And so sometime after Ronnie had died, his brother and his mom started going to those reunions, and that's when they found out the whole story of what happened to Ronnie, because even the family didn't know. They just knew he was KIA and he saved somebody.
Yeah, I mean, it's even remarkable that his fellow soldiers found out, because they might not have necessarily been able to. You know, you never know.
Yeah, well, these were the guys that were in his unit.
That's what I mean. But they were lucky to discover and tell the story, because, you know, I've heard of whole battalions being wiped out and stuff like that.
Yeah. And in this incident, I think we'll get to it. I don't want to spoil it. Anyway, so Ronnie got over there 2 weeks early, and he volunteered to go in country 2 weeks early. The guy he replaced got to go home 2 weeks early. So he told my uncle it would have been him that would have been killed if he hadn't gone home. So basically, this gives you a little bit about Ronnie's character. Ronnie re-enlists. He did not have to. He gets there early. He doesn't have to. Yeah, he doesn't have to. He can sit
there early.
Yeah, he can sit there for 2 weeks and do nothing.
I would have been that person. I'm sorry, I wouldn't have been
I would have too.
I just couldn't do it. It's like, I'll get to Vietnam eventually, but I'm going to have this last drink and smoke this last smoke.
Yep. So his thought, what Ronnie's thought process was, and this is the way the family has interpreted it, that if Ronnie had sat there for 2 weeks, that guy that he was set to replace would have been the one that got killed and not Ronnie. And I mean, to me, that just reveals a little bit more about the character of Ronnie. Even though we don't have a lot of details, he's already done 2 things he didn't have to do. So the day of the mortar attack, the way that they explained it, either his commanding officer or lieutenant was wounded. Ronnie went out to save this officer, and the shrapnel pierced his heart, and he was killed. He hadn't been there long, just a few weeks. So it's another key to his character.
And what year did he go?
71.
Okay, 71.
Yeah.
And that wasn't 71 the worst year? I forgot what they
always said like 71, 72. Yeah.
71, 72 were the quote unquote. I mean, they were all bad years, but there were a couple years that my friend told me were what he called the bad years, the worst years.
And during those worst years, I think you had like a 2 to 3 week survival rate.
Yeah, that's what he said, because he got deployed during this. During this time, he got deployed during what was considered the worst part of the war, and I think it was in the 71, 72 area.
Okay. And so this, you know, I've never been in a war zone, so I don't know how I would react. But he didn't even think about it. His commanding officer is ruined. Wounded. Another human being is laying there, been shot, needs help, and he went to help them, and a piece of the shrapnel from the mortar attack got him too. And his body was recovered, and he brought back home. So his niece said, "My dad received the last letter dated the day he died, telling him my brother was born. That was the last letter he wrote to my dad. Congrats, and send pictures." I still have that letter. It's the only letter my dad ever kept. So the morning of this attack, he wrote a letter back to his brother saying, "Congratulations on the birth of your son. Send me pictures." And then he goes out on patrol and is killed. And it's that letter is still in the family. That sucks. That sucks big time. So hopefully I have my notes right on the relatives, because again, it was the this one did this one did that, and then we go back to the first one, then we skip to the third person. So I'm trying to remember 8 years down the line what Burley had told me. Her father and Bill had passed away by this point, and Ronnie's son Patrick was killed in a car accident in 2003 or 2004. She had found out all of this stuff when she was doing research for a family book. Because, again, nobody talks about anything. And
yeah, you don't.
Yeah.
I still don't know anything about my uncle or his time. And I don't know if I ever will, to tell you the truth, because I don't think he told anybody.
Yeah.
Except maybe his own fellow soldiers, but I don't think he ever confided to anybody in the family.
Yeah. And it also makes sense. You know, Ronnie dies. His kids are raised by mom. It's not their direct relative, and they live in a different town. So they didn't really know their cousins. So they don't really know what happened until later on when she's trying to research this book and she finds this info out.
And a lot of the young folks, well, I take this back because we have recently now have an incident where people, I think, are kind of sort of feeling what went on in Vietnam, not nearly to the extent. But, you know, the reason we didn't talk about Vietnam is, one, we lost. We don't like to say we lost, but we didn't win. We didn't win. We sacrificed so many lives. We were a part of this war that nobody wanted to do, that was years and years old. And we thought we wouldn't do that ever again until about 2001. And about 20 years later, we ended another war that we also did not win. And I think now there is some stigma, and I hope this doesn't continue, about people who fought in the Afghanistan wars. And they now feel that they can't talk about it. One, they feel like failures. Two, maybe they feel like they are betrayed. And they feel that society, who also didn't want this war, are against them. And I hope, for one, I don't believe myself personally, I don't think that's true. I mean, all my friends served during this time, and all of them are now retired, and they did what they did, and I'm very proud of them, and I think they should be proud of themselves. But during this time for Vietnam, that's kind of you couldn't be proud. I mean, all your friends died. You have all these mothers that don't have sons, and they're pissed. They're really, really pissed.
Yeah.
That nothing came out of it.
And we also ran a couple of illegal wars at the same time over in Laos and stuff. It was very, it was a mess.
And that was, well, and part of it was, you know, hush, hush. What do we tell the public? What don't we tell the public? And then we got Nixon. So, it must have been a fascinating time to be alive. I was not alive during this time, but yeah.
And if you would like to see, I still think First Blood is a really good movie that shows how we treated the vets when they came back from Vietnam. A lot of them became homeless. They were not wanted anywhere, and a lot of them had PTSD. Please ignore Rambo and all the movies after it, but because it's all based on that character, John Rambo. But in the first movie, even if you only go look up online the PTSD scene where Rambo, who's played by Sylvester Stallone, is talking to his commanding officer, played by Richard Crenna, about he just wanted a meal. I just wanted a meal, and they wouldn't leave me alone, and he couldn't deal with it. And I get that scene. I have never been to war, but I understand that because I have PTSD, and I think it's just a good story that tries to encapsulate all the things that we did to Vietnam veterans.
And there's several. There's Apocalypse Now, which is, of course, the famous one. Everybody says Apocalypse Now is the movie to watch. I'm kind of
no, because that's based off of
a little over dramatized and a little bit too much.
Yes, and it's based off of Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, which takes place in Africa. So they just Apocalypse Now, they just changed it to Vietnam. Yeah. I liked Platoon when it came out, but I only saw it once, and it hit me hard enough that I was like, I'm never watching it again. And
I didn't grow up, and even me growing up, because my parents did watch Army movies and war movies growing up, but I don't remember ever really watching one about Vietnam. My dad hated Rambo, and so did my mom, so I never watched Rambo.
Yeah.
And Apocalypse Now, I was in college by the time I saw that. But the other, I mean, they're all about, like, the World Wars, or, like, Black Hawk Down was really popular. Kind of more the recent war, like Jugheads and everything about the more recent soldiers is what they're more interested in.
Yeah.
So, Band of Brothers.
Yeah, Band of Brothers was really good, and The Pacific was really good. The thing with First Blood, I just pretend none of the Rambo movies after that exist, because they turned him into an action hero that was like super Vietnam soldier, and that's
they turned him into a joke.
Yeah, and if you never knew that the two of those were connected, they aren't. Yeah. The sequels are all something completely different from what that original movie was, and I hate that had happened, because that first movie was so good.
Well, and that was a problem, though. It was so good. So what do? We make a sequel.
Yeah, we make a sequel, and then we send him back. Where'd they send him? Like in part 4 or 5, they sent him to Afghanistan.
I don't even know. Like I said, I never liked Rambo.
I saw the first 2 Rambo movies, and then I was like, I'm done.
I never thought Sylvester Stallone was a serious action person. I always thought he was a comedian. I thought Rocky's series was funny because he talked like a moron, and he's just so pig-headed about wanting to be this championship boxer, and he just pisses off everybody and flips off more or less his own wife and his family. Like, I'm going to be the best. And then he wins. It's like, where's my wife?
Yeah. Adrian. But First Blood is completely different from everything else he's done. Anyway.
Yeah, the war movies have definitely changed. And of course, now that we have new wars to talk about, Vietnam, I think the Ken Burns Vietnam documentary was the last film at all that I ever watched about Vietnam.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought it was good, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but I learned a lot from it, because I didn't learn anything in school, just because I was born in 1970. So when I get to high school, nobody wants to talk about it.
We didn't talk about it either in high school. I'm really trying to remember if it was mentioned as a footnote in a history book, because it was all about World War I, all about World War II. You had to know those ones in your history class, and then it kind of glossed over more or less American history. Yeah,
because there isn't time, and for those of you who wonder why, you try in 2 school years, you try to cover everything from the Bering Land Bridge.
Yeah.
To the present time.
To the present time. Good luck.
In 18 months. You can't. Everything is cursory.
Yep. And it doesn't matter how much the schools tried to split it up, because they did. They did like sociology, anthropology, history, and I took all of those classes and got a little bit more further down the road.
Yeah.
But you don't know nearly as much as you want to.
And realistically, U.S. history, if you're going to teach it in public school, should be a 3-year course now.
Yeah, definitely.
Very easily.
4.
I would do 4. But yeah, teachers, because my husband was a U.S. social studies teacher, he would get to the end of World War II, and he's like, I got 5 weeks of school left. Yeah. Now you got to do the civil rights, you got to do Vietnam, you got to do Glasnost, the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War, and you can't.
Yeah.
There just is not the time to get it all done.
And now it's been long enough, you have to start talking about 9/11.
Yeah.
It's like, oh crap, that's a part of history.
Yeah, and there just isn't time. So don't always go blame your teachers.
I never do.
Blame the administrators in the state who set the state curriculum, because locally, almost every U.S. history teacher I have ever come across in North Carolina, New York, and Nebraska want U.S. history to be a minimum 3-year course, because they can't cover it properly.
And not just social science.
Yeah.
All science, actually.
And still, in Nebraska, you can graduate high school and never have had Western Civ. It's still optional in the state of Nebraska.
Really?
Where I grew up, it was a 2-year course, and you had to have it to graduate from high school.
Have some sort of social study, but I think it was just any social study.
Yeah. So you could technically get around it and never take it.
Too bad I had my parents. They're like, no.
Yeah, you're going to learn it.
Well, and I took history, world history, and then American history, which of course, the American history goes into the government mostly.
Yeah.
How the government works.
Because you have to have U.S. government. Yeah. So it's, we need to revamp the entire education system, but we're going to get back to Ronnie Bales, because Connor and I could literally sit here and talk for hours.
About the education system, all right.
Oh, God, we could rage, and then people could laugh and imagine, veins popping out of my head, and how red is her face now. That whole system needs to be fixed. Anyway, so in her research, Burley's looking at things online and looking at one thing, then another, and then she ended up on the Veterans War Memorial website, and she clicked on Ronnie's name and read some comments and found Ronnie's daughter. So Ronnie had 2 daughters, and we know that his son passed away, so he did have 3 kids. This daughter, Annette, is Ronnie's only surviving child. I don't know anything about the other daughter, what happened to her, or even who her name is. And I think Annette lives in Idaho. And Verley told me, it's only us cousins now since all our parents are gone, and we're trying to keep in touch. So they initially kind of all started reconnecting because she's trying to get her family history together. And then it's like, yeah, we all live wherever, but we can find a way to keep in touch. And by now, you're getting into the internet age. You're in the early aughts, and it's a lot easier to keep in touch than it used to be. I mean, even for me, I have a friend in the Netherlands, my friend Hendrik, and I would just send him an email, and it would just say, hey, are you free? And then he would call me because he has his own business, and he could call me for like 2 cents a minute, and it cost me $1 a minute to call him. So we would flip-flop it around. And now we do WhatsApp, and it doesn't cost us anything.
Yeah.
So it's fantastic how...
And they just closed down Skype.
Yeah.
That was so surprising. That was the first video service I used.
Yeah, I think it was one of the first ones out there. Yeah. Yeah. So Verley and her brother lived in North Platte as of 2017. Bill's wife passed away in 2016, I think, of pancreatic cancer. Bill was lifelong military. I believe it was the Air Force. Verley's father died 28 years before our conversation took place. He had retired. He had made a career in the Air Force and had retired in 87, and I can't remember if it was a triple or quadruple bypass that he had, and then he retired shortly afterwards, and, bad heart, I guess. I don't have more details on that. And then her mom passed away in September 2016. She said that Bill had been in the military a long time as well, but she didn't know how long. So I think if Ronnie had not died in Vietnam, he probably would have went career as well. Bill and Grandma, so Ronnie's mom, went to the Delta Raiders reunions for many, many years. And Verley said, regardless of what anybody else thinks, she thinks Ronnie's story has always been amazing. And then she told me, I was young when Dad passed away. I was hesitant to ask my uncle, who was Bill, because it was so hard to answer. I had questions. I kind of let him talk about it when he was ready and never probed a lot. He was at the first CAV. He was in the thick of it. It was hard for him losing a brother on top of that as well. There was a lot of info on top of that because we didn't want to ask. As he was willing to talk, we lost my dad and my uncle, and then who was left to ask? Who's left to pass it on? And it's been rough. So I got the sense that, she wanted to preserve this family history, and the folks that can talk about it won't, and they're all quickly passing. And that's partly why I do this podcast, to pass on this information. And it's a way for me to learn. It's a way for other people to learn, but it's also a way to remember the people, places, and things that make up our world and make us who we are. It's not just this family that lost a great guy. It's all of humanity lost this fellow human being who did good things and who, by all accounts, was a stand-up guy. And you can see that just in the few small things that I know about Ronnie, that he really did seem to be a stand-up guy. And if you're getting the sense that the family is full of people who serve, you're right. Ronnie was with the 101st Airborne, Company D, Delta Raiders, 2nd Battalion, 501st Infantry. His brother served. Ronnie's father was one of 12 siblings, and he had been too old to serve, but all of his younger siblings served in World War II. Grandma also built Liberty ships in Seattle, and at least 5 of the Bales' line served in different branches of service. So, you know, that's why I think if he had lived, he probably would have stayed in the military. Verley had also told me that the military tendency runs in the family. It's a strong calling. And then during the first Gulf War, her uncle told her he was just going to talk about Vietnam once. He told the story, and that was it. There were 1,000,001 questions. I asked a few questions and got a few vague answers, and that was it. I knew enough not to push. Verley's father also painted a picture of Ronnie, and it hung on their grandmother or his mother's wall, so Verley's grandmother's wall, and was eventually passed down to another cousin. It's their way to keep their legacy alive. It's their way of showing how much they loved Ronnie and always remembered him. I did some other searches online, and his daughter Annette wrote on the Wall of Faces in 2002, "I never even knew you, but I feel so close to you. I am very proud to be your daughter. I know you gave your life trying to save others. I think about you every day. I love you, your daughter, Annette." So she didn't even get to know her dad. That sucks.
Definitely.
So his cousin Dixie wrote on the Wall of Faces on April 20th, 2015, "To my wonderful cousin Ronnie, I miss you so much. I think of you and Bill and Buzzy all of the time, and I am so proud of you all. I wish I could have had a lifetime to spend with you all, but I hope I will see you again on the other side. I thank you so much for your sacrifice, and you will never be forgotten. I love you." So this is 2015, which is, 44 years after he passed away. And they still miss him. On the Vietnam Veteran Memorial Fund's Facebook page, they made a post honoring Ronnie in September of 2017. And Dale Laverder commented, "At the time you were taken, brother, I had a little over 6 months left to do on a 14-month tour. Your cousin Dixie is missing you. You are not forgotten, Ron Bales. Every time I read one of these tributes to honor a fine soldier, my heart breaks for you. The ones that have been there in the Nam knows what a hard loss it is. Your family also lives a hard loss. God bless them and you. I forgot to mention all your friends that live the loss. I hope they can find peace. May you rest in peace, brother. You earned it." And then he wrote that he was in the 70-71 Cav Recon. So even though there's not a lot of information about Ronnie out there, people know who he was. And they're still remembering him. So Staff Sergeant Ronald Eugene Bales was awarded the Bronze Star Medal for Valor with Combat Distinguishing Device for his exemplary gallantry in action. He was also awarded the Bronze Star Medal for Merit for his sustained meritorious service, as well as a Purple Heart. He served as an infantryman and was assigned to D Company, 2nd Battalion, 501st Infantry, 101st Airborne Division. And Bales is buried at Sunset Memorial Park in Scottsbluff. For those of you who don't know where it's at, get on the highway and head toward Mitchell. Head west toward Mitchell,
you won't miss it.
Yeah, it's on the right.
Blind.
Yeah. So the Legacy of the Plains updated their archives with all of this new information, and with what we know now, Ronnie wasn't just a veteran; he was also a hero, and I hope everybody remembers him this way.
Yeah. That was a good story.
Yeah.
I do want to mention one other thing that. The man that I mentioned, his name's Dan Couch, and I don't think he does mind that I name drop him because he was one that does like to tell his story and his time at Vietnam. He has a blog, but the easiest way to probably get him is to find him on Facebook. And I think it's pretty easy to tell who he is because he has a lot of Vietnam memorial stuff on his page, and I don't think there anyone else's, but... That being said, he told me his favorite site, his favorite memorial site for Vietnam was actually not the Vietnam Wall. One of the second largest, or the largest actual burial site, he told me anyway, I've never been here, is in a place called Angel Fire, New Mexico. And it's a really cool place, he told me. And he told me that's where he finds solace for all his brothers and sisters. So if anyone had a chance to go out there, I've been to New Mexico several times and seen signs by it, but I never got to go there. I want to try to make a trip there next time. But yeah, Angel Fire, New Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Small little town, but it apparently has a very, very large Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Very interesting.
And I just after some of the conversation you and I just had today, anybody that knows me knows I'm against war. I hate war. But one thing I told my husband after 9/11 was, because I didn't agree with going to war over it, I said, if we're going to send them there, we need to take care of them the rest of their life, mentally and physically. And there should be zero questions about it. And as we know...
We didn't do a very good job. We didn't do as bad of a job as Vietnam, but we still... I have friends to attest that, no, you could have done better.
Yes.
You could have done better by them, for sure.
Yes. And so, also, I would like to say, if anyone lives anywhere in the Panhandle and doesn't mind coming to my house at 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday and wants to sit in our spare chair and talk and tell your story.
Whether you're a veteran or not. Yeah, you don't have to be a part of the military.
Yeah.
I mean, just have a good story.
Tell your story. Tell us your story.
Or maybe you had a brother or a grandfather or a cousin or whatever who was in the military and you'd like to talk. I mean, let's talk.
Yeah, because that's what we're doing here. We called it storytelling on the plains because we want to tell the stories here. Yeah, we tell stories about bighorn sheep. We tell stories about people. We tell stories.
We just tell stories about bighorn sheep.
Yeah. It is about the people, places, and things that make up western Nebraska. And I know there's stories out there that I don't know. And if anyone ever wants to come and sit and just put some headphones on and talk, we're up for it. We are more than happy to do that. I love doing the research, and I know that everything we do, someone at some point in time is going to say, hey, did you know this? Well, no, because if I knew it, I would have told it. But I still love doing that. I love learning new things, and, this place is open for that. Our only rule really is, don't cuss every other word. And for all of you that know me know how difficult that really is. But we're open to that.
I don't think the CDC is really a thing anymore. They think they are, but I don't think they are.
Yeah, FCC. They would come
FCC,
after us.
That's
Yeah,
right, the FCC.
Yeah. But
CDC.
Yeah, CDC.
FCC. Yeah, there you go.
I don't know. Maybe I am a disease, and they need to control me.
Well, you know, I'm not entirely wrong. The CDC really doesn't exist anymore, thanks to certain people.
So we're open to whatever. Come and talk to us. That's our only requirement. That's when Connor and I meet, is Sunday mornings at 9 in my basement, and we just.
It's not as creepy as it sounds.
No,
guys.
no, it's not. Oh my God, yeah. Now that you said that, no, it's actually
Come
nice.
on a Saturday at 9 o'clock in the morning to my basement.
We change it to 9 at night. It's all dark. You have to do the podcast in the dark. So we. Come back next week. We'll have another story. I'm sure there are many, many other folks like Ronnie Bales out there, and many other folks that are just living normal lives. And if you go, well, I'm not important. Yeah, you are. Come and talk to us. So that's it for this time. Oh my God. I'm Irene.
And I'm Connor, and this is Storytelling on the Plains.